The cellar. The first thing the boy noticed when he woke up in the darkness of the cellar was the headache. It felt as though his head was going to explode. What had he done this time to be trapped down here? Had he hurt his head? Fallen from a tree? He could have fallen from a tree with the way his body hurt. He did not remember falling from the tree, but that was nothing to be worried about. He rarely ever remembered or understood why the old man locked him up down here. He would have done something wrong, he was sure about it. What was to be worried about was the quality of the muffled sounds of footsteps and movement coming from the kitchen above him. That sounded like breakfast time. His stomach rumbled. It would be long hours before he'd be released and then directly sent to his room to study without even considering a meal. The boy reached for the book he had hidden under the cot for these circumstances. There was only the faintest shimmer of daylight shining through a crack in the wall, but it would be enough, and if not, he still had the box of matches he always kept in his trousers, knowing a detention could come up any time, for anything. Ever since he had found a way to read down here, the detention was not as daunting as it had been before. Before, when he was younger, he'd feel terribly alone and frightened, certain that this time the old man would keep the promise to forget him down here. But now, as he had grown older, that fright would just last a brief time. He would simply read, imagine being in another world with those characters who had became his friends and mentors, where he would go on real adventures and be a real hero people loved and admired. And when he didn't read, he'd plot his escape. The book was where he had left it. But when he took it out, it was uncharacteristically dusty, and the pages seemed to have grown yellow. Had it not been in perfect shape, almost new when he last left it there? Something was off. The cot felt much smaller than it used to be, and when he stood up from it, he almost banged his head into the ceiling. He reached for his matches, now wanting to see better. But in the pockets of his trousers there were no matches. Just some coins, his army identification papers, and the keys of his motor car. He was not supposed to have army identification papers, nor a motor car when he was just a 13-year-old boy dreaming of running away. And with that thought, reality came rushing in on him. He was no 13-year-old boy. He was 32 years old, officially a retired sergeant of the Kent Regiment of the British Army, unofficially still employed by the War Office for Foreign Intelligence Gathering. And he certainly was not supposed to be locked up in a damp and moldy cellar that felt too damn familiar. He was supposed to be in London, courting Ella, apologizing for the rough times they'd had. He had been so happy that he had finally found a solution that gave him the freedom to at least tell her how he felt about her. 3 days earlier, Pedro felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Almost too good. A lightness in his steps and an energy flowing through him that made everything seem easy. Quite a new feeling for him. In the evening, he met Ella's father in his club to report the results of some business he had entrusted Pedro with and take on new orders for the time the Everetts would begin traveling. When matters were settled, Pedro used his newfound courage to do something he had dreamed about doing for years. He asked for permission to court Ella. He knew it was quite old-fashioned, but given his close relationship to her parents, he did not want to approach her without them knowing. Mr. Everett took it surprisingly lightly, smiling and saying, "It was about time for that, Pedro." "Are you not objecting?" "Should I?" I don't know. I just didn't think it would be that easy." "Are you disappointed because you prepared your speech of defense and now you don't get to perform it?" "No, I just—" "What should I be objecting to, in your opinion?" "The age gap, the difference in stations, that he hadn't done it earlier, that he was misusing the trust they put in him. that she might not be interested and that could put strain on the relationship to her parents as well, that something dreadful had happened to everyone he'd ever loved before. When Pedro didn't answer, Mr. Everett smiled and said, "You see, Pedro, you have more than earned the trust we put in you." "What if it doesn't work out?" "You're afraid of losing us." They fell into an uncomfortable silence. "You two will figure out a way to stay friends then." To which Pedro nodded and quietly hoped that it would be as easy as Mr. Everett expected. Pedro had avoided Ella in those last months, while trying to find a way to avoid the unavoidable. He had not known how to face her, how to apologize for lashing out at her without having to talk about the worst days of his life. Talking and smiling while knowing that he would lose her soon. It almost hurt physically, and so he had withdrawn. But he had seen the hurt in her eyes as well. He fervently hoped his explanation would be enough to make things right again, but he doubted it very much. Edward Everett patted his shoulder and said, "Don't make such a face. She will understand. She likes you quite a lot, you know." He knew. But did she like him like a brother, or was there a chance for more? Staring into his glass, Pedro thought about how, after realizing his feelings for her, he had learned to carefully hide them. First, because of what he would have to do in the summer of 1919. Second, because he was sure her parents would disapprove of it. He had overheard them various times discussing the question if Ella was not taking too much of a liking for him. And third, when the war had started, Ella had taken up nursing and he had feverishly learned German to be sent on special missions behind enemy lines. And while many young men had hastened to marry before being sent to the front, Pedro did not want to burden Ella with the task of worrying for him, even more than she did anyway. But all of that had not taken the feelings he had for her away. On the contrary, as she evolved as a highly skilled nursing sister, dutiful and creative, his respect and love for her had grown even more. His angst to see her safe and the motivation to survive the war himself, because maybe, just maybe, he would find a way out. And it had grown more and more painful to watch her launch herself into one dangerous investigation after another, usually involving some or another handsome officer she had nursed. Pedro had found a way out, or so he thought, and the happiness about that had made him incautious, ignoring the danger angering the old man constituted. It had all been too easy. He had forgotten his vigilance and had been surprised by the attack, not even being able to put in a fight. Ella would be furious when she realized he wasn't going to meet her as planned. Either that, or plunging herself head over heels in a far too dangerous rescue quest. Probably both. He had to get out of here before she got anywhere near a clue of where he was. But when he tried his force on the iron grid that separated him from freedom, it was as sturdy and unmoving as it had been when he was 13 and less than half as strong as he was now. Anger and frustration rolled through him like an army he was not able to control, fruitlessly punching the grid until his hands started bleeding. Damn, he had always been able to control himself, concentrate on the facts, wait for the right moment, and then act with precision. It was what had kept him alive as a soldier on special missions behind enemy lines. He had taken pride in it. But it took nothing more than the old man entering his life again to revoke the demons of anger that he thought he had long left behind. Slowly his head was getting clearer. The pain stayed, though. Concentrate, calm down, guard your forces. The moment to act will come. He repeated it over and over in his mind. The anger subsided, but now the self-scolding started. What a fool had he been to believe he could win his freedom that simply. That for once the old man would play fair. Know thy enemy. Pedro had successfully suppressed all his knowledge of this particular enemy, as it had been too painful to remember. And that had been an error. Despair. No one knew where he was. No one but Ella would even know he was missing. Mr. and Mrs. Everett were traveling. The War Office would only take interest if they had a new mission for him, which had not happened for months. But Ella would know. She would never let the matter rest. Not when he had abandoned her without even writing a note. He willed her not to look for him, and wanted nothing more than for her to find him.